Sergeant Rachel Torres had imagined many things when she first enlisted 12 years ago. She'd pictured herself in dogfights over foreign skies, escorting convoys through hostile territory, maybe even earning her wings on the legendary A-10. Thunderbolt II. What she hadn't pictured was standing in a dusty aircraft graveyard at Bagram Air Base, clipboard in hand, being told her job was to oversee the dismantling of the very aircraft that had made her fall in love with flying. "You're not here to fly, Sergeant. You're here to dismantle that antique," Colonel Marcus Brennan had said during her reassignment briefing, his tone as cold as the morning air. He hadn't bothered looking up from his paperwork when he delivered the news that would shatter her world. "Budget cuts. These old birds are bleeding money, and frankly, we need pilots who can adapt to modern warfare, not museum pieces." The words stung more than he knew. Rachel had logged over 2,000 hours in various aircraft, including 400 hours specifically in A-10s during her deployment in Afghanistan. She'd brought soldiers home through sandstorms that would ground most pilots, patched bullet holes mid-flight, and earned the call sign Guardian for her uncanny ability to appear when ground troops needed her most. But none of that seemed to matter to Colonel Brennan. Now she stood before the aircraft that had once been her salvation and her pride. Tail number 810965, the same Warthog she'd flown in Kandahar. The faded shark teeth painted across its nose had chipped and weathered, but they still held that fierce grin that had intimidated enemies and comforted allies. Someone had already hung a bright red, decommissioned tag on the landing gear, like a toe tag on a corpse. "Ma'am, we're scheduled to start breaking her down next Tuesday," said Technical Sergeant Kyle Morrison, a kid who couldn't be older than 23. He gestured toward the A-10 with casual indifference. "Engines might go to a museum if we're lucky. Rest will probably end up as scrap metal or spare parts." Rachel's jaw tightened. "This aircraft is still airworthy," Morrison shrugged. "Yeah, maybe, but orders are orders. Colonel Brennan was real clear about it. No sentiment, no delays. He said if anyone gives you grief about it, to remind them that this isn't a restoration project. It's a retirement." The base felt different now, colder somehow. During her previous deployments, Rachel had been part of something vital. Pilots respected her, ground crews sought her advice, and commanding officers valued her experience. Now she felt invisible, reduced to a bureaucratic functionary whose job was to oversee the death of everything she'd fought to protect. That evening in the mess hall, she sat alone at a corner table, mechanically eating the standard-issue meatloaf, while two young pilots at the next table spoke loudly enough for her to hear every word. "Did you see that relic they parked in Section C?" Lieutenant Jake Morrison, Kyle's older brother, said between bites of his meal. "That thing belongs in the Smithsonian, not on an active base. I heard they brought in some sergeant to babysit." "It," his companion, Lieutenant Derek Walsh, replied with a smirk, "probably flew it back when pilots had to crank-start their engines." Their laughter cut through the ambient noise of the mess hall like a blade. Rachel kept her eyes on her tray, not because she was ashamed, but because she refused to give them. The satisfaction of seeing her react. She'd been through worse than mockery from cocky rookies who'd never had to bring a damaged bird home through enemy fire. Later that night, unable to sleep, Rachel found herself walking the perimeter of the base. The desert air was crisp and the stars seemed brighter here, away from the base's floodlights. Her feet carried her to the aircraft graveyard almost without conscious thought. She stopped at the chain-link fence that surrounded her old Warthog. Even in the darkness, she could make out its familiar silhouette. The aircraft sat like a sleeping giant, proud and defiant despite its condemned status. Rachel had read somewhere that elephants mourned their dead, returning to touch the bones of fallen family members. Looking at the A-10 now, she understood that instinct. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through old photos from her deployment. There was one of herself standing next to 810965 after a particularly brutal mission, both of them scarred but intact. Her younger self was grinning despite the exhaustion etched in her face, one hand resting on the aircraft's nose. They'd been through hell together and come back stronger. A noise behind her made her turn. Technical Sergeant Morrison approached, looking slightly embarrassed to be caught out after hours. Couldn't sleep either, huh? He said, joining her at the fence. Something like that. Rachel studied his face in the dim light. You seem pretty young to be overseeing aircraft decommissioning. Kyle kicked at a loose rock. Honestly, I hate this assignment. I joined the Air Force to work on planes that fly, not to tear them apart. But Colonel Brennan made it clear that questioning the decision wasn't an option. There was something in his voice, frustration, maybe even a hint of rebellion, that made Rachel look at him more closely. What do you know about that aircraft? More than I should, probably. Kyle glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers. I've been going through the maintenance logs. That bird's in better shape than half the F-16s on this base. Someone's been taking real good care of her, even after she was supposed to be retired. Rachel felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. What kind of shape? All systems functional, engines recently overhauled, weapons systems calibrated last month. Hell, someone even updated the avionics package. If I didn't. No better, I'd say someone was keeping her ready to fly. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both staring at the condemned aircraft. Finally, Kyle spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. You know, there's been chatter on the encrypted channels. Intelligence suggests something big might be brewing in the region. The kind of situation where we might need every available asset. He paused, meeting her eyes. Even the old ones. Rachel felt her pulse quicken, but she kept her expression neutral. Chatter's just chatter, Sergeant. Yes, Mom. But if it ever became more than chatter? Kyle hesitated, then pulled a set of keys from his pocket. Well, let's just say that bird's been maintained like she might need to fly again someday. As they walked back toward the base, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that this conversation was more than coincidence. Kyle Morrison might be young, but he understood something that Colonel Brennan didn't. Sometimes the old ways were the best ways, and sometimes what looked like junk was actually a lifeline waiting to be thrown. 3 days later, that chatter would become reality, and everyone would learn what Rachel Torres was truly capable of when the people she'd sworn to protect needed her most. The next morning brought the kind of bureaucratic humiliation that Rachel had come to expect from her new assignment. Colonel Brennan had called a squadron meeting, ostensibly to discuss operational readiness, but Rachel suspected it was really about making an example of her. Ladies and gentlemen, Brennan announced from the front of the briefing room, his voice carrying that particular brand of authority that demanded attention. I want to address some concerns that have been brought to my attention regarding our decommissioning operations. Rachel sat in the back row, trying to remain invisible, but she could feel eyes turning toward her. Brennan clicked to the next slide on his presentation, which showed a budget breakdown highlighting the cost of maintaining older aircraft. Some of you may be wondering why we're retiring perfectly functional aircraft, Brennan continued, his gaze finding Rachel in the crowd. Let me be clear, functionality and viability are two different things. A horse can still walk, but that doesn't mean we should use it to pull a fighter jet. Snickers rippled through the room. Lieutenant Morrison, Kyle's pilot brother, raised his hand. Sir, what about the argument that these older platforms have proven combat effectiveness? Brennan's smile was thin and cold. That's exactly the kind of backwards thinking that keeps us mired in the past, Lieutenant. Yes, the A-10 has a combat record. So did the P-51 Mustang. That doesn't mean either belongs in modern warfare. Rachel felt her hands clench in her lap, but she forced herself to remain silent. This wasn't the time for a confrontation, not with the entire squadron watching. Our focus needs to be on the future, Brennan continued. Drones, precision strikes, surgical operations. The era of flying tanks that can barely break the sound barrier is over. We need pilots who can adapt to new technology, not mechanics who cling to old iron. The word mechanics hit Rachel like a physical blow. She'd spent 12 years proving herself as a pilot, not a grease monkey, but Brennan was systematically reducing her to the latter. The message was clear. She was being not just demoted, but declassified entirely. After the meeting, Rachel headed to the flight line to continue her inspection of the decommissioning list. 7 aircraft were scheduled for retirement, but the A-10 was the crown jewel of the collection. As she approached the hangar where it was housed, she noticed a small crowd had gathered. "I still can't believe they're scrapping this thing," someone was saying. Rachel recognized the voice as belonging to Master Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez, one of the most experienced crew chiefs on the base. "Political decision," another voice replied. "Colonel Brennan's got his sights set on a Pentagon position. Cutting costs and pushing modernization looks good on promotion reviews." Rachel stepped into the hangar, and the conversation stopped abruptly. Rodriguez nodded respectfully, but the others dispersed quickly, leaving Rachel alone with the crew, chief, and the aircraft. "Sergeant Torres," Rodriguez said, her tone carefully neutral, "I've been going through the maintenance records for 810965. Want to see something interesting?" She led Rachel to a computer terminal and pulled up the aircraft's service history. "Look at this pattern," Rodriguez said, pointing to the screen. "Someone's been performing unauthorized maintenance on this bird for the past 6 months. Systems checks, parts replacements, even some upgrades that aren't in the official records." Rachel studied the data, her pulse quickening. "Who authorized this work?" "That's the thing. Nobody did. At least, not through official channels. But whoever did it knew what they were doing. This aircraft is in better condition now than when it first arrived at Bagram." Before Rachel could respond, footsteps echoed through the hangar. Colonel Brennan approached with 2 other officers, his expression stern. "Sergeant Torres," he said curtly, "I understand you've been spending quite a bit of time with this aircraft." "Yes, sir. I'm conducting the required inspections for decommissioning." "I see." Brennan walked around the A-10, his hands clasped behind his back. "And what have your inspections revealed?" Rachel chose her words carefully. "The aircraft appears to be in good working order, sir." "Good working order," Brennan repeated, his tone mocking. "Sergeant, let me ask you something. When was the last time you actually flew one of these museum pieces?" 18 months ago, sir. During my deployment in 18 months, Brennan interrupted. "Do you know how many advances in military aviation have occurred in 18 months? How many new systems, new tactics, new capabilities our modern aircraft have developed?" Rachel remained silent, sensing a trap. "This aircraft," Brennan said, patting the A-10's nose with condescending familiarity, "represents everything that's wrong with military nostalgia. It's slow, it's expensive to maintain, and it's vulnerable to modern air defenses. The fact that it's in good working order is irrelevant." One of the officers with Brennan, Rachel recognized him as Major Frank Stevens from the operations group, spoke up. "Sir, if I may, the A-10 still has some unique capabilities that our newer aircraft lack. Close air support, survivability in contested environments." "Major Stevens," Brennan's voice carried a warning edge, "I hope you're not suggesting that we should base our operational decisions on sentimentality." "No, sir. Just pointing out that different missions require different tools." Brennan's eyes narrowed. "The mission, Major, is whatever I determine it to be. And I've determined that this base needs to focus on the future, not the past." He turned back to Rachel. "Sergeant Torres, I want this aircraft processed and ready for dismantling by Friday. No delays, no complications. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir." After Brennan and his entourage left, Major Stevens lingered for a moment. He waited until the colonel was out of earshot before speaking. "Sergeant Torres," he said quietly, "I flew A-10s for 8 years before I took this desk job. That aircraft right there saved my life more times than I can count." He paused, studying her face. "If you ever need anything, paperwork expedited, supplies requisitioned, questions answered, you know where to find me." As Stevens walked away, Rachel felt a flicker of something she hadn't experienced since arriving at Bagram. She wasn't completely alone. There were people on this base who understood what she understood, who recognized the value of what they were being ordered to destroy. That evening, she returned to her quarters to find an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a list of frequencies and call signs, along with a handwritten note, "Encrypted comms, monitor channel 7, things are happening, KM." Kyle Morrison was taking a risk by reaching out to her, but he was also sending a message. The resistance was forming, and she wasn't the only one who believed that some things were worth fighting for. Rachel folded the paper and tucked it into her pocket. Friday was 3 days away, but she had a feeling that Colonel Brennan's timeline was about to become irrelevant. The question wasn't whether she would have to choose between following orders and doing what was right. The question was whether she would be ready when that choice was forced upon her. The encrypted radio crackled to life at 0347 hours on Thursday morning, shattering the pre-dawn quiet of Bagram Air Base. Rachel had been monitoring Channel 7 religiously since receiving Kyle's note and the urgent chatter that now filled her. Earpiece made her blood run cold. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Blackbird 6, came the strained voice through the static. "We are taking heavy fire, coordinates 34.7821 north, 69,000, 1589 east, multiple casualties, requesting immediate air support." Rachel shot upright in her bunk, fully awake in an instant. She knew those coordinates. They were in the Korangal Valley, one of the most dangerous sectors in the region. A quick check of her watch showed it was still 40 minutes before the duty officer would typically arrive at the operations center. "Blackbird 6, this is Control," came the response. "We copy your position. Air support is being scrambled. ETA 25 minutes. 25 minutes. Rachel's mind raced as she pulled on her flight suit. In 25 minutes, Blackbird 6 could be overrun. She'd seen it happen before, a quick firefight turning into a massacre when air support arrived too late. She grabbed her gear and headed for the operations center, arriving to find it in controlled chaos. Major Stevens was barking orders at a skeleton crew of technicians, while multiple radio operators tried to coordinate the rescue mission. "Sir," Rachel announced her presence. "Sergeant Torres reporting." Stevens looked up, his face grim. "Torres, what are you doing here?" "I heard the chatter, sir. Thought you might need extra hands." Stevens studied her for a moment, then nodded toward the tactical display. "Blackbird 6 is a reconnaissance team that went dark 12 hours ago. They just re-established contact, but they're pinned down in a valley with limited escape routes. We've got 2 F-16s en route, but the terrain's going to make close air support tricky." Rachel examined the topographical map on the screen. The valley was narrow, surrounded by steep ridges that would force fast-moving jets to make difficult attack runs. It was exactly the kind of environment where the A-10's slower speed and maneuverability would be an advantage. "Sir, what about—" she began, but Stevens cut her off with a sharp look. "Don't even think about it, Sergeant. That aircraft is grounded, and you're not authorized for combat operations." Before Rachel could respond, Colonel Brennan burst into the operations center, his uniform hastily thrown on and his face flushed with anger and confusion. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded. "Why wasn't I notified immediately?" "Sir, we followed protocol," Stevens replied. "Initial response team was activated. Air support scrambled." "I don't want to hear about protocol," Brennan snapped. "I want to know why I'm finding out about this from a damn radio alarm instead of a proper briefing." The radio crackled again. "Control, this is Falcon Leader. We're approaching the valley now, but visibility is poor. Heavy smoke and dust from explosions. Requesting guidance on target identification." Stevens keyed his microphone. "Falcon Leader, proceed with caution. Friendly forces are danger close to hostile positions." Rachel watched the tactical display as the F-16s made their approach. The narrow valley would force them to come in fast and high, making it difficult to distinguish between friendly and enemy forces. She could see the problem developing before it happened. "Falcon Leader, negative on the gun run," came the pilot's voice, tight with frustration. "Too much smoke. Can't get a clear shot without risking friendly fire." "Blackbird 6, this is Control. Can you mark your position?" "Negative, Control. We're out of smoke and our signaling equipment is damaged. We're running low on ammo and have 3 wounded. Request immediate assistance." The operations center fell silent except for the static-filled communications. Rachel could see the desperation on Stevens's face as he realized they were running out of options. The F-16s were too fast for the precision required, and there was no other air support available. That's when Colonel Brennan made the decision that would change everything. "All stations, this is command," he announced over the radio. "Pull back all air support. Blackbird 6, you are ordered to extract on foot to the alternate rally point." "Sir, what?" Stevens looked at Brennan in disbelief. They have wounded personnel and are under heavy fire. They can't extract on foot. They'll have to, Brennan replied coldly. I will not risk multi-million-dollar aircraft and highly trained pilots on a mission with this level of uncertainty. Sometimes soldiers have to fight their way out. Rachel felt something break inside her chest. She thought of the reconnaissance team trapped in that valley, probably boys not much older than Kyle Morrison, bleeding and desperate while their commanding officer calculated the political cost of saving them. Sir, she said, her voice steady, despite the rage building inside her. Request permission to take the A-10 for close air support. Brennan turned to her with the kind of look reserved for particularly stupid children. Absolutely not, Sergeant. That aircraft is not mission-capable, and you are not authorized for combat flight operations. The aircraft is fully functional. Sir, I've been maintaining it as part of the decommissioning inspection. All systems are operational. I don't care if it can fly to the moon, Brennan snapped. You're not taking that museum piece into a combat zone. The decision is final. The radio crackled again. Control, this is Blackbird 6. We can't hold this position much longer. Please, we need help. Rachel looked at Major Stevens, who was staring at the tactical display with haunted eyes. She thought about the oath she'd taken when she enlisted, about the promise to protect and defend, about the young soldiers who were about to die because of bureaucratic cowardice. Sir, she said to Brennan, her voice perfectly calm, what if I disobey that order? The operations center went dead silent. Brennan's face flushed red with fury. What did you just say to me? I asked what would happen if I disobeyed your order and took that aircraft to help those soldiers. You'd be court-martialed, dishonorably discharged, and probably spend the next 10 years in military prison, Brennan snarled. And for what? To play hero in a broken-down piece of junk? Rachel nodded slowly, as if she was actually considering the consequences. But her mind was already made up. It had been made up the moment she heard the desperation in Blackbird 6's voice. Understood, sir, she said quietly. Then she turned and walked out of the operations center. Behind her she could hear Brennan screaming orders to have her confined to quarters, but his voice was already fading. Rachel was running now, her boots pounding against the concrete as she sprinted toward the aircraft graveyard. She had maybe 5 minutes before security would be mobilized to stop her. Kyle Morrison was waiting by the A-10 when she arrived, as if he'd known this moment would come. He had the external power unit running and the cockpit ladder already in position. Ma'am, he said simply, she's ready to fly. Rachel paused at the base of the ladder and looked up at the scarred aircraft that had been sentenced to death. Kyle, you know what this means for both of us? Yes, ma'am, but I also know what it means for Blackbird 6. He handed her a helmet and flight suit. Besides, someone's got to make sure that bird gets the send-off she deserves. As Rachel climbed into the cockpit, she could hear sirens beginning to wail across the base. In the distance, vehicles were racing toward their position. But the Warthog's engines were already spooling up, and the old bird was remembering what it felt like to be alive. Tower, this is Guardian taking off without clearance, she announced over the radio. Blackbird 6, this is your angel. I'm coming. The A-10 rolled forward, gathering speed as Colonel Brennan's voice exploded over the radio, ordering her to abort. But Rachel Torres was already airborne, climbing into the dawn sky with the only thing that mattered now: the power to save lives that others were willing to abandon. The A-10 Warthog responded to Rachel's touch like a faithful dog recognizing its master after a long separation. Every switch, every gauge, every subtle vibration through the airframe felt familiar despite the 18 months since her last combat flight. As she climbed away from Bagram, the radio exploded with frantic communications from the tower, but she had already switched to tactical frequencies. Blackbird 6, this is Guardian, she transmitted, using her old call sign. What's your situation? The response came back immediately, filled with relief and desperation. Guardian, thank God. We've got 6 personnel, 3 wounded, pinned down in a valley approximately 2 clicks north of Checkpoint Delta. Estimate 30 to 40 hostiles in elevated positions. Rachel checked her navigation system and confirmed the coordinates. The Korengal Valley stretched below her like a jagged scar in the earth, its steep sides perfect for ambushes. She could already see smoke rising from multiple positions. "Copy, Blackbird 6. I'm approaching from the south. Can you give me a mark on hostile positions?" "Negative on smoke, Guardian. We're down to emergency supplies only, but they're concentrated. On the eastern ridge, approximately 200 meters from our position." Rachel banked the A-10 into a wide turn, studying the terrain below. The reconnaissance team was trapped in a natural bowl with limited cover, while their attackers held the high ground with clear fields of fire. It was a textbook kill zone, and without air support, Blackbird 6 wouldn't survive another hour. She activated the aircraft's targeting systems, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility that came with carrying 30mm rounds and Maverick missiles. The Warthog might be old, but its teeth were still sharp. "Blackbird 6, Guardian is making an attack run from the southeast. Keep your heads down." Rachel pushed the stick forward, diving the A-10 toward the valley floor. The airspeed indicator climbed as she descended, but she kept the aircraft well within its operational limits. Unlike the F-16s that had been forced to abort, she could take her time, line up her shots, and deliver precision fire where it was needed. The eastern ridge erupted with muzzle flashes as the enemy fighters realized they were under attack. Rachel could see their positions clearly now, a mix of prepared fighting positions and hastily constructed barriers. She squeezed the trigger, and the GAU-8 Avenger cannon roared to life. The 30mm rounds chewed through the rocky outcropping like a chainsaw through timber. Ancient stone exploded in clouds of dust and fragments as the enemy positions disintegrated. Under the sustained fire, Rachel pulled up from her first pass and banked hard left, already lining up for another attack run. "Direct hit, Guardian!" came the excited voice from Blackbird 6. "You got at least 6 of them, but we're still taking fire from the northern ridge." Rachel had already spotted the secondary positions. The enemy fighters were learning, spreading out and using better concealment. But the A-10 had been designed for exactly this kind of close air support mission, and Rachel had been flying it long enough to make the aircraft an extension of her own body. She rolled the Warthog into a knife-edge turn that would have been impossible in a faster aircraft, then dove toward the northern ridge. This time she mixed cannon fire with a Maverick missile, the guided weapon slamming into a cluster of enemy fighters with devastating effect. "Guardian, you are cleared hot on all targets except our position," Blackbird 6 transmitted. "We've got a clear route to the extraction point now." "Negative, Blackbird 6. Stay put until I clear the entire area. I'm not leaving until you're all safe." For the next 15 minutes, Rachel methodically worked over the valley, eliminating threats and suppressing enemy fire. The A-10's thick armor shrugged off small arms fire while its powerful cannon reached out to touch targets that would have been impossible for faster aircraft to engage. When the last enemy position fell silent, Rachel made one final pass over the reconnaissance team's location. She could see them moving now, carrying their wounded toward the extraction point with the confident pace of soldiers who knew the sky was friendly. "Blackbird 6, this is Guardian. Area is secure. Good luck getting home." "Guardian, from all of us, thank you. You saved our lives today." Rachel felt a familiar warmth in her chest, the satisfaction that came from using her skills to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. It was why she had become a pilot in the first place, why she had fought so hard to earn her wings on the A-10. But as she turned the Warthog back toward Bagram, reality began to reassert itself. She had disobeyed a direct order from her commanding officer, stolen a military aircraft, and engaged in unauthorized combat operations. By any measure, her career was over. The radio crackled with a new voice as she approached the base. "Guardian, this is Major Stevens. You are cleared for landing on runway 03. Emergency services are standing by." "Copy, Major. Guardian inbound." As the familiar silhouette of Bagram Air Base grew larger on the horizon, Rachel could see the crowd that had gathered near the runway. Emergency vehicles, security personnel, and what looked like half the base's personnel were waiting for her return. She brought the A-10 in for a smooth landing, the aircraft's thick tires kissing the runway with barely a bump. As she taxied toward the parking area, she could see Colonel Brennan standing near a cluster of security vehicles, his face twisted with fury. But there were other faces in the crowd too, faces that showed respect, admiration, even awe. Major Stevens was there, giving her a subtle thumbs up. Kyle Morrison stood near the hangar, grinning despite the trouble he was certainly in. Master Sergeant Rodriguez nodded approvingly as the A-10 rolled past. Rachel shut down the engines and popped the canopy, stepping out onto the ladder as the crowd pressed closer. The first person to reach her was Colonel Brennan, flanked by 2 security officers. "Sergeant Torres," he snarled, "you are under arrest for disobeying a direct order, theft of military property, and unauthorized use of a combat aircraft. You are confined to quarters pending court-martial proceedings." But before the security officers could move forward, another voice cut through the crowd. "Colonel Brennan, stand down." Everyone turned to see a figure approaching from a black SUV that had just pulled up to the flight line. Rachel recognized the silver eagles on the man's collar, a full colonel, but not one assigned to Bagram. "Sir," Brennan stammered clearly, caught off guard. "Colonel Harrison, I wasn't expecting—" "Obviously," Harrison replied dryly. He walked directly to Rachel, ignoring Brennan entirely. "Sergeant Torres, I'm Colonel David Harrison from Pentagon Operations. I've been monitoring the situation here with great interest." Rachel came to attention. "Sir." "At ease, Sergeant. I understand you just completed an unauthorized combat mission?" "Yes, sir." "Results?" 6 friendly personnel extracted safely, sir. Estimated 30 to 40 enemy combatants neutralized. No friendly casualties." Harrison nodded approvingly. "Outstanding work. Sergeant, I have some questions for you, but first—" He turned to Brennan, his expression cold. "Colonel, you are relieved of command pending an investigation into your decision to abandon American soldiers in combat." The crowd fell silent. Brennan's face went white. "Sir, you can't—" "I can, and I have. Major Stevens will assume temporary command of operations." Harrison's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "As for you, Sergeant Torres, we need to talk." As the security officers led a stunned Brennan away, Rachel felt the weight of uncertainty settle on her shoulders. She had saved Blackbird 6, but her own fate was still very much in question. Colonel Harrison gestured toward the SUV. "Shall we discuss your future, Sergeant? Because after what I witnessed today, I have a feeling it's going to be very different from what you expected." Colonel Harrison's temporary office in the Base Operations Center felt more like an interrogation room than a debriefing space. Rachel sat across from him at a metal table, her flight suit still damp with sweat, while he reviewed a thick folder of documents. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. "Sergeant Torres," Harrison finally said, looking up from the papers. "In the past 4 hours, I've received reports from 3 different intelligence agencies, 2 Pentagon departments, and 1 very interested general who happened to be monitoring communications in this sector." Rachel remained silent, unsure whether this was good news or very bad news. "The mission you flew, without authorization, I might add, has generated more attention than most official operations receive in a month." Harrison leaned back in his chair. "Tell me, what made you think you had the right to steal a military aircraft?" "I didn't steal it, sir. I requisitioned it for a combat mission." "Requisitioned?" Harrison's eyebrow arched. "Under whose authority?" Rachel chose her words carefully. "Sir, I took an oath to support and defend. Those soldiers needed help, and I was in a position to provide it." "Even though your commanding officer explicitly forbade it?" "Especially then, sir." Harrison stared at her for a long moment, then made a note in his folder. "Sergeant, do you understand the gravity of what you've done? Disobeying a direct order in a combat zone is a court-martial offense. In some circumstances, it could be considered mutiny." "Yes, sir, I understand." "Good, because I need to know that you fully comprehend the consequences before we proceed." Harrison pulled out another document. "This is a preliminary report from the reconnaissance team you extracted. Would you like to hear what they said about your actions?" Rachel nodded, though her throat felt dry. "Fazamad." "Guardian's intervention was the difference between mission success and total loss of personnel," Harrison read. "The pilot demonstrated exceptional skill and courage, engaging multiple targets in close proximity to friendly forces without a single incident of friendly fire. Without this support, our team would not have survived." He looked up. "They're recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross." Rachel blinked in surprise. She had expected praise from the soldiers she'd saved, but not a medal recommendation. "Unfortunately," Harrison continued, "they're also recommending that you be court-martialed for disobeying orders. It seems even the people whose lives you saved understand the seriousness of military discipline." The door opened and Major Stevens entered with Kyle Morrison trailing behind him. Both men looked nervous but determined. "Sir," Stevens said, addressing Harrison, "I requested permission to speak on Sergeant Torres's behalf." "And I assume Sergeant Morrison has something to add as well?" Kyle stepped forward, his young face serious. "Sir, I want to take full responsibility for my part. In this mission, I prepared the aircraft and provided logistical support without authorization." Harrison looked between the two men. "So we have a conspiracy, then. Multiple personnel working together to circumvent orders." "Sir, if I may," Stevens interrupted, "the orders in question were fundamentally flawed. Colonel Brennan's decision to abandon the reconnaissance team violated basic principles of military leadership." "That's not your call to make, Major. Chain of command exists for a reason." "Yes, sir. But so does the moral obligation to protect American lives." Harrison made another note. "Major Stevens, you're assuming command of this base temporarily. Are you prepared to face the same charges as Sergeant Torres if this investigation goes badly?" Stevens straightened his shoulders. "Yes, sir. Some things are worth the risk." Rachel felt a surge of gratitude toward both men. They were putting their careers on the line for her, and more importantly, for the principle that soldiers should never be abandoned. "Sergeant Morrison," Harrison continued, "you're very young to be taking this kind of stand. What made you decide? To risk your career?" Kyle glanced at Rachel, then back at Harrison. "Sir, my grandfather flew B-17s over Europe. He used to tell me that the aircraft don't matter. It's the people flying them and the people they're trying to save. That A-10 has been sitting in a hangar for months, perfectly maintained, while we pretend it's worthless. But when people needed help, it was the only thing that could do the job." Harrison studied the young sergeant for a moment. "And you believe the aircraft was properly maintained for combat operations?" "Yes, sir. I can provide complete maintenance logs. Someone's been keeping that bird mission ready even after it was officially decommissioned?" "Someone?" Harrison's tone sharpened. "Who exactly has been performing unauthorized maintenance on a retired aircraft?" The room fell silent. Rachel realized they had reached a critical moment. Someone higher up the chain had been keeping the A-10 operational, and that person had been careful to remain anonymous. "Sir," Rachel said carefully, "the maintenance logs show regular inspections and updates, but they're signed with duty roster numbers rather than specific names. It's possible that multiple personnel were involved." Harrison flipped through more documents. "Or it's possible that someone with sufficient authority has been preparing for exactly this kind of situation." He looked directly at Stevens. "Major, as the new base commander, what's your assessment of the A-10's operational status?" "Sir, based on the mission just completed, I'd say it's one of the most reliable aircraft on this base." "And Colonel Brennan's decision to decommission it?" Stevens hesitated, clearly walking a tightrope. "Sir, I believe the colonel was following budget guidelines from higher command, but those guidelines may not have taken into account the unique operational requirements of this theater." Harrison made another note, then closed the folder. "Gentlemen, you're dismissed. Sergeant Torres, remain behind." After Stevens and Morrison left, Harrison's demeanor shifted subtly. He seemed less like an investigating officer and more like someone evaluating a potential asset. "Sergeant, off the record, who do you think has been maintaining that aircraft?" Rachel considered her answer carefully. "Sir, I think someone with combat experience recognized that bureaucratic decisions don't always align with operational reality. Someone who understood that we might need every available asset. Someone who was prepared to take responsibility when the time came?" "Yes, sir." Harrison nodded slowly. "Sergeant Torres, you've put me in a very difficult position. On one hand, you clearly violated orders and circumvented military authority. On the other hand, you saved American lives and demonstrated exceptional skill under pressure. He pulled out a new document. I've been authorized to offer you a choice. Option 1, we proceed with a formal court-martial. You'll likely be convicted, but given the circumstances, you might receive a reduced sentence. Option 2, you accept a transfer to a special operations unit that has need for pilots with your particular skills and flexibility regarding orders. Rachel felt her heart skip. Special operations, sir? A unit that flies missions other. Pilots can't or won't. Missions where sometimes the right thing to do conflicts with official policy. Missions where someone with the courage to steal an A-10 might be exactly what we need. And the court-martial charges would disappear. Officially, today's mission would be reclassified as an authorized combat operation conducted under emergency protocols. Rachel stared at him. Sir, what about Colonel Brennan? Harrison's expression hardened. Colonel Brennan's career is over. His decision to abandon soldiers in combat has been noted by people much higher than me. He'll be transferred to a desk job where he can't endanger lives with his politics. And the A-10? Will be transferred along with you. It seems that particular aircraft has proven its worth. Rachel felt a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. So, when do I report? 2 weeks. That gives us time to process the paperwork and brief you on your new assignment. Harrison stood and extended his hand. Welcome to the team, Sergeant Torres. Or should I say, Captain Torres? Sir? The promotion comes with the transfer. Congratulations. Captain, you've earned it. As Rachel shook his hand, she realized that her act of defiance had done more than save 6 soldiers. It had revealed a network of people who understood that sometimes doing the right thing required breaking the rules. And now she was going to be part of something bigger, something that valued courage over compliance. One more thing, Captain, Harrison said as she prepared to leave. That call sign of yours, Guardian. How attached are you to it? Very attached, sir. Good, because where you're going to need it. News of Rachel's mission spread. Through Bagram Air Base like wildfire, carried by whispers in the mess hall, coded messages between ground crews, and knowing looks exchanged during duty shifts. By the 3rd day after her unauthorized flight, the story had taken on a life of its own, growing with each retelling until it resembled something between a military legend and a folk tale. But while the enlisted personnel spoke of her actions with barely concealed admiration, the officer corps was deeply divided. Some viewed her as a hero who had saved American lives. Others saw her as a dangerous precedent that threatened the very foundation of military discipline. Captain Jennifer Walsh, Lieutenant Derek Walsh's older sister and the base's senior intelligence officer, had been quietly conducting her own investigation into the events surrounding the mission. What she discovered would change everything. Major Stevens, she said, entering his temporary office with a thick folder under her arm. I need to show you something. Stevens looked up from the stack of paperwork that had consumed his attention since assuming command. What is it, Captain? Walsh placed the folder on his desk and opened it to reveal a series of communications intercepts, satellite imagery, and intelligence reports. Sir, I've been analyzing the tactical situation that led to Blackbird 6's predicament. What I found is disturbing. Stevens leaned forward, studying the documents. Explain. The reconnaissance mission was compromised before it even began, Walsh said, pointing to a communication intercept dated 3 days before the mission. Someone leaked the team's route and timing to enemy forces. The ambush wasn't opportunistic. It was planned. Stevens felt a chill run down his spine. You're saying we have a leak? I'm saying we have a traitor, sir. Someone with access to classified mission planning deliberately set up Blackbird 6 to be killed. Do you have any idea who? Walsh hesitated, then pulled out another document. Sir, the leak came from someone with command-level access to operational planning. The communications were sent from a base terminal using Colonel Brennan's authentication codes. Stevens stared at the evidence, his mind racing. Brennan? Why would he? I've been digging deeper into his background, Walsh continued. The colonel has significant gambling debts, sir. Casino markers from Las Vegas, private loans from questionable sources. He's been under financial pressure for months. You think he was being paid for intelligence? I think he was being blackmailed, sir. Someone had leverage over him, and they were using it to compromise our operations. Stevens sat back in his chair, the implications hitting him like a physical blow. If Walsh was right, then Rachel Torres hadn't just saved 6 soldiers. She had unknowingly disrupted a larger intelligence operation that could have compromised countless other missions. Captain, does anyone else know about this? Not yet. Sir, I wanted to bring it to you first. Good. Keep it that way for now. Stevens reached for his secure phone. I need to contact Colonel Harrison immediately. While Stevens made his call, Walsh studied the timeline of events with growing clarity. Colonel Brennan's aggressive push to decommission the A-10s wasn't just about budget constraints, it was about removing assets that could interfere with planned enemy operations. A reconnaissance team trapped without air support would be easier to eliminate, and their deaths could be blamed on equipment failures or tactical mistakes. But Rachel Torres had refused to let those soldiers die, and in doing so, she had exposed a conspiracy that reached much deeper than anyone had imagined. Colonel Harrison will be here within the hour, Stevens said, hanging up the phone. Captain, I want you to prepare a complete briefing. Include everything, the communications intercepts, the financial records, the timeline of Brennan's actions. Yes, sir, but Major, there's something else you need to know. Stevens looked up, dreading what he might hear next. The A-10 that Captain Torres flew, someone had been sabotaging it for weeks. Small things, loosened connections, degraded seals, minor systems failures. Nothing that would show up in routine inspections, but enough to make it unreliable in combat. Someone was trying to ensure it would fail if used? Yes, sir. And given the timeline, I believe that someone was acting on Colonel Brennan's orders. Stevens felt anger building in his chest. The scope of Brennan's betrayal was becoming clear. He hadn't just tried to abandon soldiers in combat, he had actively worked to sabotage the aircraft that could save them. Captain, who's been maintaining that A-10? Who kept it operational? Despite the sabotage? Walsh smiled for the first time since entering his office. That would be Master Sergeant Rodriguez and her crew, sir. They've been conducting unauthorized maintenance for months, basically undoing the sabotage as fast as it could be implemented. They knew? They suspected something was wrong when they kept finding the same problems recurring. Rodriguez is old school, sir. She knows what properly maintained aircraft should look like. An hour later, Colonel Harrison arrived with a team of investigators from military intelligence. They took over a secure conference room and began what would later be described as one of the most significant counterintelligence operations in the theater. Captain Walsh, Harrison said after reviewing her evidence, this is exceptional work. How long have you suspected Brennan's involvement? Only since Captain Torres's mission, sir. But looking back, there have been warning signs for months. Mission compromises, equipment failures, intelligence leaks, they all trace back to decisions made at the command level. Harrison turned to Stevens. Major, I need you to prepare a list of all personnel who had knowledge of Brennan's activities. Anyone who helped maintain the A-10, anyone who questioned his orders, anyone who showed unusual loyalty to Captain Torres. Sir, are they in danger? Potentially. If Brennan was working for enemy intelligence, they'll want to eliminate anyone who can expose the operation. As if summoned by their conversation, Kyle Morrison appeared in the doorway, his face pale with urgency. Sir, we have a problem, he announced. Colonel Brennan just tried to access the aircraft hangar. When security stopped him, he claimed he had orders to inspect the A-10 for evidence of sabotage. Harrison and Stevens exchanged glances. Where is he now? Harrison asked. Confined to quarters under guard, sir. But there's more. We found this in his possession. Kyle handed over a small electronic device that Harrison recognized immediately as a data transmission unit. He was trying to upload something from the A-10's flight computer, Kyle continued. Probably the mission recordings from Captain Torres's flight. Harrison's expression darkened. He's trying to cover his tracks. Or worse, he's trying to provide intelligence on our capabilities to his handlers. Stevens stood up abruptly. Sir, we need to place this entire base under security lockdown. If Brennan was compromised, we have no idea how deep this goes. Agreed. But first, I want to speak with Captain Torres. She's been at the center of this from the beginning, and I have a feeling she's noticed things that even our investigation hasn't uncovered. As the security alert sounded across Bagram Air Base, Rachel Torres was summoned to what she thought would be another routine debriefing. Instead, she walked into a room full of investigators who were about to reveal that her act of defiance had uncovered one of the most significant security breaches in recent military history. The war wasn't just being fought in the skies above Afghanistan, it was being fought in the command structures and communications networks that kept American forces alive. And Rachel Torres, the pilot they had tried to ground, had just won the most important battle of all. The interrogation room in the base's security facility felt like a tomb. Colonel Marcus Brennan sat across from Colonel Harrison, his once pristine uniform wrinkled and stained with sweat. The confident authoritarian who had commanded Bagram Air Base was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed man who knew his world was crumbling around him. Rachel Torres stood against the back wall, officially present as a witness, but really there to see justice served. Harrison had insisted she be present for this confrontation. After all, her actions had exposed the conspiracy that now filled 3 folders worth of evidence on the table between them. "Colonel Brennan," Harrison began, his voice carrying the cold authority of someone who had seen every form of military corruption imaginable. "We have communication intercepts, financial records, and testimony from multiple witnesses. Your cooperation now might be the difference between 20 years in military prison and life." Brennan's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the water glass in front of him. "I want to speak to a lawyer." "You'll get one. But first, I want you to look at someone." Harrison gestured toward Rachel. "Captain Torres, step forward." Rachel moved to where Brennan could see her clearly. He flinched when their eyes met, as if the sight of her caused him physical pain. "This is the pilot you tried to ground," Harrison continued. "The one whose aircraft you sabotaged. The one whose mission you tried to prevent. Look at her, Colonel. Look at the person who saved 6 American lives while you were selling intelligence to the enemy." "I never sold anything," Brennan protested weakly. I was being coerced." "By whom?" Brennan's resolve cracked completely. "They had photographs, videos, things from my time in Vegas that would have destroyed my career, my marriage, my family. They said all I had to do was provide routine intelligence, troop movements, mission timings, equipment status. They said no one would get hurt." "But people were getting hurt," Rachel spoke for the first time, her voice steady but filled with controlled anger. "Blackbird 6 was set up to die because of your intelligence leaks. How many other teams were compromised? How many other soldiers died because you were too weak to face your gambling debts?" Brennan looked at her with something resembling shame. "You don't understand the pressure." "I understand that you took an oath," Rachel interrupted. "The same oath I took, to support and defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. You became the enemy, Colonel." Harrison pulled out a satellite phone and placed it on the table. "Colonel Brennan, you're going to make a call. You're going to contact your handlers and tell them you have critical intelligence about the A-10 program. You're going to arrange a meeting." "I can't. They'll kill me if they find out I've been compromised." "They'll kill you anyway," Harrison replied coldly. "This way, at least you die serving your country instead of betraying it." Brennan stared at the phone for a long moment, then slowly picked it up. His hands shook as he dialed a number from memory. "It's me," he said when the call connected. "I have intelligence on the A-10 incident, critical information about their capabilities and pilot qualifications. Yes, I can meet tonight. The usual place." He hung up and looked at Harrison with desperate eyes. "What happens now?" "Now you wear a wire and try to redeem yourself," Harrison replied. "Captain Torres will be nearby with a tactical team. If things go badly, she'll extract you." Rachel felt a surge of dark satisfaction. The man who had tried to destroy her career was now depending on her to save his life. 3 hours later, Rachel sat in the cockpit of a modified Black Hawk helicopter, watching through night vision scopes as Brennan met with his contact at an abandoned compound outside the base perimeter. The enemy operative was a middle-aged man in civilian clothes who looked more like an accountant than a spy. "Guardian, this is Overwatch," came the voice through her earpiece. Target has been identified as Hassan Mahmoud, known intelligence operative. Recording equipment is functioning normally. Rachel watched as Brennan handed over a briefcase, supposedly containing classified documents about the A-10 program, but actually filled with disinformation that military intelligence had prepared. The conversation was brief, professional, and utterly damning. "Payment has been confirmed," came another voice over the radio. "Multiple accounts, dating back 8 months. We have everything we need." But something went wrong. Mahmoud suddenly stepped back from Brennan, his hand moving. Toward his jacket, someone had betrayed the operation. "Guardian, targets are armed and moving to eliminate the asset," Overwatch reported urgently. "You are cleared hot for extraction." Rachel didn't hesitate. She brought the Black Hawk in low and fast, the helicopter's searchlight blazing as tactical. Teams fast roped down around the compound. Brennan dove for cover as gunfire erupted around him. The firefight was brief but intense. When the dust settled, Mahmoud was dead and 2 other operatives were in custody. Brennan had taken a bullet in the shoulder, but was alive, saved by the woman he had tried to destroy. As medics worked on Brennan's wound, he looked up at Rachel with something resembling gratitude. "Why?" he asked weakly. "Why save me, after everything I did?" Rachel studied his face for a moment before answering. "Because that's what we do, Colonel. We don't leave people behind, even when they don't deserve it." 2 weeks later, Rachel stood in the Pentagon briefing room where her new assignment was being explained. The A-10 had been officially transferred to her unit, along with Kyle Morrison and Master Sergeant Rodriguez. The aircraft that had been scheduled for decommissioning was now the flagship of a special operations squadron. "Captain Torres," the general addressing her said, "your actions at Bagram have had consequences far beyond what you probably imagined. The intelligence network you helped expose has been operating across 3 theaters of operation. Because of your courage, we've been able to roll up an entire spy ring." "What about Colonel Brennan, sir?" "Cooperating fully with investigators. He'll serve time, but his testimony has been invaluable. He'll likely be out in 5 years instead of 20. Rachel nodded. Justice wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was about redemption. "Sir, what's our first mission?" The general smiled. "There's a situation developing in Syria. A group of special forces operators may need extraction from a heavily defended position. The terrain is too dangerous for conventional aircraft." Rachel felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with a challenging mission. "When do we deploy, sir?" "Wheels up in 6 hours, Captain. Think you and that old warthog are ready?" Rachel thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The betrayal, the courage, the impossible mission that had changed everything. She thought about the A-10 waiting in the hangar, scarred but unbroken, ready to fly into danger once again. "Yes, sir," she said with absolute confidence. "We're ready." 6 months after the events at Bagram Air Base, Captain Rachel Torres stood on the flight line at an undisclosed location, watching the sunrise paint the horizon in shades of gold and crimson. The A-10 Warthog beside her bore new scars, bullet holes that had been patched, scorched paint from missile near misses, and fresh kill marks stenciled beneath the cockpit. But it was still flying, still fighting, still bringing soldiers home. The Special Operations Unit she now commanded had completed 12 missions in 4 different countries. Each time, the aircraft that officials had written off as obsolete had proven its worth in ways that newer, more expensive jets could not. The slow, ugly Warthog had become the guardian angel of Special Operations Forces worldwide. "Captain," Kyle Morrison approached, now wearing Staff Sergeant stripes and carrying a tablet filled with mission data. "We've got orders for tomorrow, hostage rescue in Somalia. 24 civilians held by militants in a compound near Mogadishu." Rachel studied the intelligence briefing on the tablet. The compound was surrounded by civilian buildings, making precision strikes from high-altitude aircraft impossible. But the A-10's ability to loiter low and slow, delivering accurate fire while avoiding collateral damage, made it perfect for the mission. "What's the timeline, Kyle?" "Wheels up at 0600. Navy SEALs are already in position, but they need air support to breach the compound walls without harming the hostages." Rachel nodded, her mind already working through the tactical challenges. It was exactly the kind of mission the A-10 had been designed for. close air support in urban environments where every shot had to count. Any word from Master Sergeant Rodriguez on the aircraft status? All systems green, ma'am. She's been working around the clock to keep the bird mission ready. Says it's the best maintained A-10 in the entire Air Force. Rodriguez had become something of a legend herself. Among ground crews, her ability to keep the aging Warthog operational under impossible conditions had earned her recognition from the Pentagon and job offers from defense contractors, but she had chosen to stay with Rachel's unit, claiming that some aircraft were worth fighting for. Captain Torres, a new voice called out. Rachel turned to see Colonel Harrison approaching with a man she didn't recognize, an older officer with the bearing of someone accustomed to making important decisions. "Sir," Rachel came to attention. "Captain, I'd like you to meet General Patricia Hawkins, Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations. She's here to discuss the future of your unit." General Hawkins stepped forward, her expression serious but not unfriendly. "Captain Torres, I've been following your unit's operations with great interest. Your success rate is unprecedented, and your ability to complete missions that other aircraft can't handle has not gone unnoticed." "Thank you, ma'am." "However, there are some in the Pentagon who believe your unit represents an inefficient use of resources. They argue that your missions could be handled by more modern aircraft with greater cost-effectiveness." Rachel felt a familiar chill. The bureaucrats were trying to ground her again, this time armed with spreadsheets instead of personal animosity. "General, with respect, our mission success speaks for itself. We've completed 12 operations without a single friendly casualty." "I'm aware of your record, Captain, but I'm also aware that you're flying an aircraft that's officially obsolete, using tactics that some consider outdated in situations that newer technology could handle more efficiently." "Could it, ma'am?" Rachel's voice carried a hint of challenge. "Could an F-35 have extracted Blackbird 6 from that valley? Could a drone have provided the precision fire support needed to breach that compound in Yemen without hitting the school next door?" General Hawkins smiled, the first indication that this conversation might not be heading where Rachel feared. "Captain, I flew A-10s in Desert Storm. I know exactly what that aircraft can do that others cannot. The question is whether the Air Force is ready to admit that sometimes old technology is still the best technology." Rachel blinked in surprise. "Ma'am? The Pentagon has approved the expansion of your unit, Captain. We're giving you 3 more A-10s and the personnel to operate them. Your squadron will become the official Special Operations Close Air Support Unit for all branches of the military." Rachel felt her heart skip. "All branches, ma'am?" "Marines in Syria, Navy SEALs in Africa, Army Rangers in South America, whenever. They need close air support in impossible situations. They'll call you. Your unit will report directly to Special Operations Command with the authority to deploy anywhere in the world within 12 hours. Kyle Morrison, who had been listening quietly, let out a barely audible "yes" under his breath. "There's one more thing, Captain," General Hawkins continued. "We're promoting you to Major and giving you command authority over the entire squadron. You'll have the resources to train new pilots in your methods and maintain your aircraft to the highest standards." Rachel was speechless. 6 months ago, she had been facing court-martial for stealing an aircraft. Now she was being given command of an entire squadron dedicated to proving that sometimes the old ways were still the best ways. "General, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept the assignment. And say you'll continue doing what you do best, bringing people home." That afternoon, Rachel stood alone beside her A-10, running her hand along the aircraft's battle-scarred fuselage. The Warthog had been written off as obsolete, marked for destruction, dismissed by people who valued politics over performance. But it had endured, adapted, and ultimately triumphed. "Hey, old girl," she whispered to the aircraft. "Looks like we're not done yet." The wind picked up, and she could have sworn she heard the faint whistle of air moving over wings, as if the aircraft was sighing with satisfaction. Somewhere above, a formation of F-22 Raptors streaked across the sky at supersonic speed, leaving contrails that would dissipate in minutes. But the A-10 would still be here tomorrow, and the day after that, ready to fly low and slow into danger to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. It wasn't the fastest or the newest or the most expensive aircraft in the sky, but it was reliable, tough, and absolutely deadly when it needed to be, just like the pilot who flew it. As the sun set over the airfield, Rachel Torres walked toward the hangar where Kyle Morrison and Master Sergeant Rodriguez were already preparing for the next mission. There were hostages to rescue, soldiers to protect, and impossible missions to complete. The Guardian was ready to fly. Epilogue: 5 years later, Major Rachel Torres' squadron had become the most requested air support unit in the military. The 4 A-10 Warthogs under her command had flown over 200 combat missions, earning the unit a Presidential Unit Citation and establishing a new doctrine for close air support operations. The aircraft that bureaucrats had tried to retire had become the backbone of special operations worldwide, and the pilot they had tried to ground had become the most respected close air support commander in the Air Force. Sometimes the old ways really were the best ways. Sometimes refusing to follow bad orders was the most patriotic thing a soldier could do, and sometimes a single act of courage could change the entire course of military history. The A-10 Warthog flew on, ugly and proud, and absolutely indispensable, just the way it was meant to be. Author's note: this story is dedicated to all the pilots, ground crews, and support personnel who understand that the mission always comes first, regardless of what the spreadsheets say. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not in the sky, but in the halls of bureaucracy, where courage means standing up for what's right, even when everyone tells you you're wrong. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our everyday life stories. Community! Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.